So, for those of you that I have not yet met, my name is Debbie Stair, and I am the Assistant Director for Leadership Development here at MASB. I have been on staff now for a little over 12 years. And prior to that, I was a board member, like all of you, in my local district. I served for over 15 years at the local level, served on my ISD board as well. And so, those two experiences, along with working for the Superintendents Association and the Principals Association, I think gives me a nice, well-rounded perspective of education in general and this topic in particular. I'm a big believer in strategic planning. I actually feel like I was one of the folks who ushered it into my district for the first time. That was a very long time ago. And although I've been gone from my board for a while now, they have just done their fifth iteration of a strategic planning process. And so hopefully what I share with you today will make you just as interested in the process as I was when I first heard about it at an MASB event all those years ago. So let's see. Just kind of as I think this graphic really sort of lays it out nicely about what really is a strategic plan and why do we need one. And really, it's without goals and plans to reach them, you're like a ship that has set sail with no destination. If we don't know where we're going, how do we know when we're going to get there? And so that's really what it's all about. It's figuring out what do we want to be at a point in the future, and then what kinds of plans do we have to put in place to ensure that we're actually going to get there. That's in it in its most simplest terms. I'm going to give you some more details, so hopefully you'll stick around, even though I've given you the simple version of strategic planning already. So where does it all come from, and why should boards even consider strategic planning? Well, a number of years ago, there was some research done by our counterparts, actually, over in Iowa. And there had never been any research done about what highly effective boards bring to the table. How do they have the biggest impact on student achievement? And so that Iowa Lighthouse Research Study was taken, those results were taken and put together in this graphic by NSBA, our national association. And you'll notice that up in the upper right-hand part of the circle, it says vision. And effective school boards establish a clear vision with high expectations for quality teaching and learning that supports strong student outcomes. A vision statement is part of a strategic plan. As I mentioned, that's our destination. What do we want to be in the future? Now, the other four pieces are all very important parts of the puzzle about effective boards. And actually, they all play pieces in a strategic plan as well. But we're really going to just sort of narrow in and focus on that vision portion of the work today. So MASB for a very long time has been recommending what we call our cycle of healthy governance. And those are three things. And we ask that every year you take a look at these three things. Now, I know by law, you have to be doing superintendent evaluation. That's the second one, the second bullet point there. I hope that your boards have considered using board self-assessment as a way to improve not only your individual responsibilities and work as a board member, but also the effectiveness of your board. If you haven't and you're interested, by all means, you can reach out and we can tell you how to use that free service. And then you'll see the third one is goal setting / strategic planning. For districts that don't have a strategic plan, you are likely setting annual goals. And those annual goals can be related to each other from year to year, or they could be totally separate, independent, not connected to the years prior or the years in the future. And where strategic plan really sets you up for success is that it takes a longer look. So where goal setting is usually an annual process, a strategic plan is usually developed for 3 to 5 years. Hopefully they'll last the 5-year period, but some districts have really gained some traction in their strategic plans, and they have moved along and made a lot more progress in a shorter period of time. And so their plan will only last them 3 years in some cases. That's not a bad thing, actually. That's a good thing when districts are really moving forward and accomplishing the things they set out to do. And so, why are all three of them on the same slide? Why are they all related? Why have we been suggesting those? Well, if you take a look at some of the statements in our board self-assessment, which you can see online, you can just find that page and click the button and you can see the whole assessment. But these are some excerpts, and you'll notice that they talk about, can a board clearly articulate their vision and mission statements? Are they using them for their goals and their decision making? Do they review them annually? Do they really align their budgets and their priorities around those strategic goals? And so you can see one thing connects to the other. And then for all of you evaluating your superintendents on your annual basis, you'll know that regardless of the tool you choose to use, you're actually required within that tool to evaluate your superintendent on progress towards district-wide goals. And currently, you'll see that the new language has just the three labels: the needs, support, developing, and effective. But you'll see that that's 15% of your superintendent's evaluation is in the progress towards those district-wide goals. For districts who have a strategic plan in place, we suggest that those goals are one and the same. You might add a specific goal that you want your superintendent to work on very specifically, but for the most part, you're going to use your strategic plan goals. And if you're doing annual goal setting, you are likely using those same goals as well for your superintendent evaluation. So here's what a process for strategic planning might look like. Now, I'm using our process. There are certainly others who lead and facilitate strategic plans for districts, and they're going to have some very similar components. And then, we'll have a few nuances that are very specific to our process. I will tell you that ours has been developed specifically for school districts. So while other organizations might do nonprofits and businesses and community organizations, you all know that schools are a very unique entity, and therefore our challenges and barriers and opportunities are going to be slightly different than some other type of organization. And so we've developed our process to meet the needs of school districts. So you'll see that in the very beginning of this 3 to 4 month process, we're going to take a look at anything you currently have in place. So if you've never done a process before, then we'll look at what other kinds of annual goals you've had. And even if you haven't done a strategic plan, you might have some of the components of them that have been developed individually. So we're going to look at all of that, and we're going to talk about project scope and sort of get everything planned, right? And then we move to the second column where we actually start doing the work in your district. And so we're going to gather 2 types of data. And I would tell you that anybody who says you only need one type is missing a big piece of the picture. You want both types, quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative data is going to be gathered in the form of feedback from your staff, your students, your parents, your community. And we typically do that in face-to-face settings. We usually host a virtual session, and we also have an online survey. The bulk of the feedback in any district at this point comes from the online survey, but we certainly want to have an opportunity to have those in-person discussions because we can press for clarity and really get a better understanding when someone makes a statement of what it is that they feel. So we gather up all of that data. We also gather that quantitative data, and we look at several types of data. We want to look at the individual district that we're working with, and we want to look at what their data says across a number of different areas, but we also want to see some other districts who are similar to your district in some various areas that we have found useful over time. Things like special ed population, free and reduced lunch population, the size of your district, and some others. So we look at all sorts of data from the current year, but we also do trend data. We go back about 5 years and take a look at that too, because the important data that might be useful in this process might be in your own trend data, but it might also be in comparison data to other districts. So the facilitator takes all of that information, packages it up in a useful format, and comes back to the district in the third column, and we host a retreat. Now, you've probably heard that term before, a strategic planning retreat. And it's called a retreat because years and years ago, it used to be something that people would go away for a couple of days and do all of this work. People don't have that kind of time anymore. So we do it all in one day. It is a full 8-hour day where we invite in a really great, well-rounded group of folks that again includes all sorts of perspectives, experiences, and connection with the district. We always like to have the whole board as a part of that process. We think it's important and a really great proactive way for a board to engage in conversation with their staff and their community about the things they care about and in that planning process. And so we spend that day in all kinds of activities that build upon each other. But at the end of the day, that group will come away with a mission, a vision, belief statements, sometimes called values, and then goal statements, normally somewhere in the 4 to 5 area for goal statements. And we take a look at the entire district. So we look at things like demographics and finance and personnel and academic performance and just a whole host of information. But at the end of the day, we have those 4 components. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in just a minute. Once we have that done, we come back again. And this is where our process differs slightly from some others. What we found is that when we leave that day of the retreat with those great, big, wonderful ideas, some folks have a difficult time saying, how do I take that and break it down into manageable pieces that we can really use in our own district and move it forward? So we come back, we work with a group of key staff members that the superintendent identifies, and we really start breaking it down. We break it down into the first year and where's our focus going to be and moving the plan forward, setting it up for success. And then we also take and we marry it to your MyKIP process. That should be a term that most of you probably recognize by now. That's your school improvement process through the Michigan Department of Education. And we take that plan and put it together with this one so that we have one plan that the district is working on, one set of goals. And that's where you really get the synergy of moving forward, is everybody, regardless of the hat they wear, are going to be working on the same process and the same goals, moving towards that vision. And so we break it down into manageable bite-sized pieces. We do a sample action plan with the group, and we talk about things like monitoring and communication. And then from there, we come back and we give a final report to the board. It's actually 3 different documents that we give them that captures all of the work product that we've accumulated throughout the process so that they have that to use over the next 5 years. But we're actually asking the board for 4 very specific things that they're going to approve. The first one is beliefs. What are those things that really talk about how we treat each other and the things that talk about why we do the work we do? They're non-negotiables. And again, I said sometimes districts call those values as well as beliefs. The second one is mission. And mission is really a statement about if the district didn't exist, what's the one thing that would, what need would not be met, right? So what's our core purpose for being? The third is the vision. And that's that statement that says, what is it we're working towards? It should be inspirational so that it can be used in things like recruiting staff, superintendent potentially, and even board members. Here's what we're about. Here's where we're going. Do you feel that you would be a good part in that process? And then the fourth one, that's those goals, right? Those 4 to 5 statements that talk about the focus areas that we're going to work on for the next 3 to 5 years. The board will see the more detailed work about what the focus is going to be for the first year, but they don't approve that because that's in the superintendent's purview. We really provide that as information only. But a board always approves the 4 main components: beliefs, mission, vision, and district goals. The board does have an important role in the planning. And I think this slide really has a lot of key points. Now, you're not responsible as a board member for making sure all these things, you're not responsible for doing all these things, but you are responsible for making sure they're happening. So does the board understand the process? You know, are they clearly identified priorities? Is there a comprehensive document that anybody can look at and know what we're doing? And I'm not going to read all the points because, as Larissa put in the chat, we're going to send out the slides to you. But they're great questions to ask and have discussion about in your board meetings and, you know, in your work sessions around, are we doing our part as a board to make sure the plan moves forward? Are we supporting it in the appropriate ways? And these are all appropriate governance related questions that you should be asking and you should know the answers to in that. Now, I always tell boards throughout the process that the most important function they have after they adopt it is to actually monitor progress, because this is where the rubber hits the road, right? One of the things we know is that things that get monitored are more likely to happen. And so when a board sets up a calendar that has regular updates and everyone knows that the board's going to expect those updates, usually I would say on a quarterly basis, but there are some other calendars that some boards use. But when everyone knows the board is going to get those updates, they really tend to work harder to make sure things get done on time, right? Again, you're going to want to make sure that you're aligning your budget to the goals that you've set forth. There's no quicker way to see a plan fail when we don't support it with the resources that are needed. And some of your initiatives will be costly and others will be less so. But always, again, asking that question, have we made the alignment between our plan and our budget? And then, as I mentioned, making sure that we're aligning it with the MyKIP process and really looking for opportunities to involve more people along the way. Now, we've included a lot of people up front, right? We've asked people for their opinions and their feedback about the district. We've included some more people in the retreat and in the implementation meeting. But wherever it makes sense to continue to include people, whether they be internal people like staff or external folks like your community members and parents, by all means, look for those opportunities, because what you're going to do is create ambassadors who want to make the plan move forward and who will also bring some things to the table that you may not know about or have access to. And so it's really important to sort of think about making those ripples on a pond. How many more people can we involve? How many more people do we want to feel like they own this process? And again, when you're making difficult decisions about the things you're choosing to move forward and support versus the things you're letting go of, a plan and these opportunities for involvement can really help a board when those decisions are tough to make. Schedule those regular meetings. I talk to board presidents all the time about making sure that you calendar them out on an annual basis so that you don't find yourself several months into the year and gosh, we didn't get that done yet. Now we've got to play catch up. I do see some boards tie their agendas, their actual items on their agenda for their meetings to their strategic plans so that they're connecting the dots for everybody. Even if you don't do that, you can always make sure that it's brought up in presentations at your board meetings. Here's why we're discussing this tonight. It's all about this particular goal and moving our strategic plan forward. I also encourage districts to celebrate successes. It's not one of the things that districts are very good about. We have a tendency to sort of dwell on the negatives because of the press and just the culture we're in today, but really looking for opportunities to share the wins as they happen. Things that you accomplish in the plan, make sure and share that with people. It makes them feel like the time they spent, whatever time it was valuable, that they're actually seeing a return on their investment of time and energy. And so just looking for opportunities to create those. And then really thinking about how do we make sure that we set ourselves up for success in years 2 and beyond. And that's by setting up an annual review of what you've done or not, what things went well, and maybe you hit some roadblocks, and then learning from those and then taking a look at year 2. You can do that on your own, or you could potentially have a facilitator back and ask for that assistance. But those are all things that will really set you up for success should you undertake a planning process. There's a lot of benefits to strategic planning. Again, I'm not going to read every one. I do want to highlight a couple of the ones that I think are my favorites, having done this work now for so long. Number 5, it provides a base from which progress can be measured and establish a mechanism for informed change when needed. Everybody in the district should be using your strategic plan to make decisions. Is what I'm being asked to decide upon or do moving us in the direction that we've said we want to go or not? And if it's not, then why are we considering this? Is this part of our mission? Is it helping us get to our vision? They really should almost be guideposts for decision making. And that's at every level. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking about at the board table, the superintendent, your building administrators, or a teacher or a custodian in the building. How am I seeing my role in moving the district forward? And then measuring that progress as well. Number 6 is bringing together everyone's best and most reasoned efforts. Notice that I didn't say this was a plan developed just by the board and superintendent or just by the cabinet and brought to the board. This is a highly inclusive process that makes a lot of owners of the process. It's very different to have something you've helped create versus something someone has handed you and said, we hope that you'll buy into this. We want to create owners. And so you're getting everyone's best thinking. And some of that thinking is going to be different than yours. And that's a good thing because we bring all of the thinking to the table and then we figure out together, how do we compromise and give here and there? And everybody ends up loving parts of it and maybe not liking a few things. Like that's what compromise is all about. And that's how we get to the very best solutions, is through everybody coming to the table and listening to those different voices to move forward together, because all those voices are in your community. And then number 10, I sort of already addressed this as well, provides the framework from which to solve major problems. I know a lot of districts who have had to make some really incredibly tough decisions, closing buildings, all sorts of things, and they have used the process to share with the community why they're doing what they're doing. And what I often find happens, if they've really spent time communicating well, is while some community members might not like the decision that's being made, it might affect them, in particular, and so they might not like it. They do have a better understanding of it, and it does create a trust among their leadership. Now I understand how they got to the decision they did. And while I might not like it, I get it. And so for any of you who might be considering what's called what I've referred to for many years as sacred cows, things that people love in your district. We almost all have those things. And yet some of us know they really aren't giving us the bang for the buck, or they aren't working the way we would have hoped or liked, but they're really hard to get rid of because so many people love it. Well, these are the kinds of plans that help you when you have to make those tough decisions. So, but there's just so many benefits to putting together a strategic planning process, as long as it's one that's moving forward, not one that's sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust. If you go back to your district saying, gosh, I think we ought to think about a strategic plan, you're likely to run into some folks who have some reasons for not wanting to go down that path. I've probably heard all of these over my 12 years here, and a few years before that, even when we were bringing it to my own district. And I would suggest that every one of these excuses can be answered, and managed. And there isn't one that doesn't have a really good response to it. The last one is one that I hear oftentimes, gosh, we really just can't afford to do this. We're strapped. We try to put every dollar into our classroom. This is just another cost. It's another expense for us. And I would say that if that's the thinking, that you need to change your thinking from it's an expense to an investment over a 5-year period that is really going to pay dividends in that synergy and that movement that you get from everybody moving together forward. So really, I'm sort of went through it relatively quickly, but it's really 4 steps. Taking a look at where are we currently, right? Looking at the data, how does our community feel about what we're doing or not? What does our hard data say? And being honest with yourselves about what your current situation is. And then deciding, where do we want to be? What is our ideal state? And really dream about what are the things you want to give your students in your district. And then put the plan together on how to get there. Will everything happen in the time frame that you identify? No, probably not. But you're still working towards that process, and you'll learn from mistakes along the way, and you'll create some really great things that move really fast. But putting the plan in place is what makes the difference. Measured steps about how to move from step A to point B. And then monitoring. Like I said, that is the most important function of the board. Once they adopt it, is how are we going to know that we're making progress? And then asking the question, what are we going to do if we're not making the progress we had hoped? So with that, I sort of ended a little bit earlier today, Larissa, but happy to take any questions. Did we have some in the chat at all?
We have one in the Q&A.
Okay.
How specifically should the objectives for the superintendent for a defined evaluation period be completely aligned to the district's strategic plan?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you're going to use your goals and then whatever objectives you might have identified for a shorter period of time, a reasonable amount, taking what you expect to accomplish over a 5-year period, breaking it down annually. How much of that can we expect this year, next year, and beyond? And then making sure that you have really good, thoughtful conversations at the beginning of the time period to say, what are we going to use to evaluate? Let's all get on the same page so that we know what data we're going to say is making progress or not. That's one of the key mistakes I see made sometimes is we don't have that conversation up front. We wait until the end and now it's time to evaluate. And so one person uses one kind of data, typically your superintendent, and then someone else says, well, I didn't know we were going to use that. I thought we were going to use something else. Or we get to the conversation and we're looking at the data and it's like, okay, well, where did we start in order to identify progress, right? And someone will say, well, we didn't used to collect that data. We didn't do that at the beginning. We should have done that. And so no baseline data was ever gathered. So that conversation up front between the board and superintendent, once they know what the objectives are, to really discuss and be very clear about what they're going to be looking for at the end of that year and along the way in those updates. So that we know, again, that we're all on the same page and we're going to have clearly identified data to use as our progress measure.
One more question is, can you be more specific on the MyKIP alignment with the strategic plan?
Sure. So in MyKIP, you must have goals each year that you're working on in the areas of academics and the learning environment. And so by design, MASB has taken two of our areas. We worked with the department for a couple of years, aligning our process to their MyKIP process so that those two goals, as we look at what we're going to be doing in the strategic plan, we bring those in and we work those things together. So again, we're aligning it and overlaying it. So we're not having one academic goal over here as part of the strategic planning process and a different one on the other side for the MyKIP. We're working smarter so that we're aligning those things and moving them forward together. Now, it does not require, MyKIP does not require any of the other areas we look at, things like operations or communications or personnel and leadership. But we think those are too important in the systems world to think about all those other things that support academic performance. And so those are areas that we look at as well. But you must, for MyKIP, have those two, academics and learning environment. Any other questions? They're a quiet group today. Let's see. I got a question here in the chat. How do you respond to board members and staff and the superintendent that say strategic plans don't matter and data shouldn't make a difference? We should disregard state and testing data. Is that good practice? Well, that's where I said you've got to have those conversations up front. What data are we going to use? Are we going to use internal data for specific things? Are we going to use statewide data for others? I would never say that data doesn't make a difference. I couldn't say that. But keying in and making sure you're using the right data for the right item can sometimes be difficult these days. There is so much data in front of us and available to us that sometimes we have trouble narrowing down to what's the right data for this particular initiative and making sure that that's what we're using. And if it doesn't work for us one year, then being honest and open in the conversation and saying, that didn't give us what we thought it was going to give us. Let's look at some other way to measure our progress. So certainly data makes a difference. And yeah.
I think that's it for questions.
Okay, well, gosh, I really sort of went through it pretty quickly today. By all means, if you think of your question after the fact, like I do sometimes, I'll be driving home from somewhere or, having a cup of coffee later and think to myself, why didn't I ask that question? If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, you'll have the slide when Larissa sends them out to you, but you can capture it now as well. You can always reach out and just ask a question and I'll be more than happy to answer that for you. And, should your district ever get to a point where it wants to consider doing a strategic plan if you don't have one, or if it's time to update yours, then you certainly could reach out to me as well at MASB. I would be the person who would help you get that set up. They're not all done by me. We have a pretty large contingent of facilitators, all highly trained in the process, and they'd be happy to help you as I assign them to work with different districts. I work real hard to find the right person for the right district. But questions can start with me, and more than happy to just give you some feedback. And for any of you who might have a strategic plan, but it's getting kind of old, I would tell you now, anything you did before COVID is way outdated. If you have something in place that you've been using and just kind of putting band-aids on, it is definitely time to take a fresh look at it. Things have changed so dramatically that those plans are pretty much outdated, and you really need a fresh new look, kind of at everything. Doesn't mean that you won't keep your mission or vision that you already have. It just might mean tweaking some pieces, but definitely taking a hard look at where you are now versus back then is definitely needed. Yeah, I see. So thanks for the comment about, good overview for a newly elected official. If you are brand new and you're on here, you might have gotten little pieces and parts of this because you're still sort of in that place where you're drinking from a fire hose, and that's okay. Um, you know, Maybe now you'll have a little bit more information if you hear the concept brought up, and some questions to ask and consider as your board and superintendent team discuss how we should plan for the future. But by all means, it is definitely a learning process. And thanks to all of you for joining us today for lunch. I know you could have been somewhere else doing something else, but we appreciate the fact that you joined us. Larissa, when will those go out? Did you type in next week or
Yes,
something?
we will send out a copy of the slides and the recording on Friday.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.